This is Hogan Fan 924. I'm back again, doing another little tutorial on the Mosin Nagant rifle. And today I'm going to get into a couple details about the sticky bolt syndrome and all the possible causes of sticky bolt. What I did is today I put together a diagnostic flowchart on all of the ways that the Mosin Nagant bolt can become sticky and what the root causes of those might be and how we can go about addressing each one of those. Now, I did a lot of studying of how the bolt actually operates, and there are some subtleties that I've never seen previously discussed before. Now, I know there are a lot of videos out there. I haven't watched them all, so maybe all these points have been touched on somewhere in the past by someone, but I haven't seen them, so I decided I would go through every point on how the bolts can be sticky. And I want to demonstrate just how slick you can get the bolt of a Mosin operating, as well as how slick you can get the trigger operating. So one of the things I'll do is show this particular bolt. I'm going to go through and work it a little bit, but I want to show how I can open that bolt with just my pinky, no problem, very simple. But I also wanted to show how I was able to slick up the trigger on this particular rifle and what I'm able to get the trigger pull at. So I got my Wheeler gauge here. It's first increment's 8 ounces. It goes up to 8 pounds. And I'll do a quick trigger check on here and I'll show you what I got. So this one comes out to right at about 2 pounds, and I think it's 12 ounces, 2 pounds, 12 ounces. So about 2.7 pounds effort on this one. And this is the standard Russian sear spring. It's not been shimmed. I do not advise anybody to shim the spring down. I experimented with shimming a while ago, and there are a number of problems with shimming. When you shim, you increase the amount of slack in the spring. This I added the little take-up spring that I used with that chip clip that I showed in my first video, and so it's got a little take-up, so it's almost like a 2-stage trigger, or it will go. So you can achieve very light trigger pulls if you do all the right things to work on these triggers. And in my previous video, I linked a trigger study from another gentleman on YouTube. I don't quite remember his username. That I found very useful, very helpful to working on my triggers. And the next thing we're going to get into is this issue of sticky bolt. So I created this flowchart. I'm going to try to embed it into my video if I can. I was having some trouble earlier trying to create a Windows Movie Maker file and voicing this over. For some reason my microphone wasn't recording, and I kind of gave up on the idea. But the main thing is you have to figure out exactly what parts of the system are causing a sticky problem. And you can break it down into 4 areas, starting with 2. And one is the bolt sticky when you're dry cycling, as I am here with no round in the chamber. And my bolt is not sticky when dry cycling, but let's say I'm a perfectionist, as I am, and I want to absolutely have the smoothest Mosin bolt you've ever seen in your life. I want to slick this up as much as possible. So let me pretend that it's a little bit rough on opening and a little sticky on opening. What are some of the potential causes as to why that might be the case? Well, one of the potential causes is right here. It's this camming ramp on the bolt body and the corresponding one underneath here that you can't see on the cocking piece. Those two surfaces interact with each other to cause the bolt. This is now with how you disassemble the bolt. I'm not going to disassemble it, but I'm going to show how these two cams rub against each other. Oops, came apart. And when you open the bolt, those two cam surfaces are sliding against each other, and that's what causes the cocking piece to pull back, to compress the firing pin spring, and until it hits this detent that then locks the cocking piece back. Then, when you drop the bolt, that the sear spring has caught the tab right here on the knob on the cocking piece, holding it back. So slicking up the trigger, it's important that this surface, the vertical surface in this direction, in this plane of this tab on the cocking piece, be very smooth and well lapped in to the sear on the trigger. But that's just for smoothness, grittiness, to reduce the grittiness. It won't do too much. It'll do a little bit, but not much, to reduce trigger effort. So the other thing that you run into when opening the bolt that can cause some stickiness is if you actually look very carefully, this area right here on the receiver, when you open the bolt, this front edge, this very front edge of the bolt, rubs against this surface. That's partly what contributes to, let me decock. So when you open, those two come into contact, and this slides the whole bolt body back because this is on an angle. So that contributes to the quality of the surface of those two surfaces, and how smooth they are with respect to each other contributes to how smoothly the bolt will open. So we know then that when opening the bolt, there are two main areas that contribute to how smooth this bolt will open. That when you are dry cycling, when there's no round in the chamber. So if you have a sticky bolt when you're dry cycling with no round in the chamber, those are the two main interfaces. The camming ramp here in the back between the bolt body and the cocking piece, and this surface up front here relative to its equivalent spot in the receiver. So one of the things that we can do to slick that up is you can use, if they're not too rough, you can use something like a polishing compound. I've used a Perfectit 3M rubbing compound, and I have also used lapping compound, the finest you can get, because lapping compound for those areas, unless they're very, very difficult, it's going to be, if you put this lapping compound into the camming ramps at the back of the bolt body and the cocking piece, it's going to get extremely difficult to open this bolt as you're trying to lap it in. You can use it in this forward area and on the receiver. It's very effective there. There's very little pressure really at that area, so you can use it there, and that'll work fine. But I would recommend you start off with a polishing compound in the camming ramp area. So I'm going to show you how we go about doing that. So you can take a little bit of polishing compound, doesn't take a whole lot. We can put it in right there in that camming ramp when the bolt's open, and just dab it in there. That's a lot more than you really need. So we'll dab it in there, and just for the heck of it, I'm going to put a little bit up on this front edge of the receiver up here in this little area that also comes into contact with the with this edge here on the front of the bolt handle body. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cycle the bolt back and forth. Now there's a couple ways you can do this. You can take the action out of the stock and take the trigger out and take the sear out, and then you can just cycle the bolt back and forth and you don't have to worry about pulling the trigger or anything. But since I have it in the rifle, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the trigger back, and I'm going to keep the trigger pulled back, and I'm just going to cycle this. Now, this is just for demonstration purposes, because if I were actually doing this for the first time on this rifle, and I've already done it once, what I would do is I would cycle this bolt about 1,000 cycles. And typically what I would do is I would cycle it 100 to 200 times, then wipe off that polishing compound from those camming ramps, and to clean out, you know, the grittiness out of it. And then I would put some fresh compound in there and keep cycling it until I've got up to about 1,000 cycles. And frankly, that whole process is probably going to take you 40 minutes to an hour to do. It will wear out your hand. I did get blisters on my hand last time I did that. So I'm going to show again, cycling it. And take that out, and you can see what that does, or what that will do, is it will start to polish that ramp area there. It'll start to polish this area, and it'll start to polish this area right up in here in the receiver. This area right in the receiver there that mates against the bolt. And as those areas get polished, they will operate much more smoothly against each other. Now, what if you are dry cycling without a round and you feel like it's a little gritty, right? And it feels a little gritty just as you're going over and just as you're starting to close it. Well, there's one spot in this action that also can be lapped in to smooth that out, and that is this area right here on the back of the bolt, this specific area right there. And that area comes into contact with this surface right on the back of the receiver. So what we can do, we can take this polishing compound and we can dab it on this little corner back here of the receiver, or we can put it right there and then put the bolt back in. And we can just kind of work this back and forth like that. You don't have to close it all the way, just as it starts to cam over. And that'll work this area right here. It'll polish that area up. It allows you for a very smooth closing of the bolt. So this bolt already operates quite smoothly. I've already worked it over, so I'm just doing this really for demonstration purposes. But I have had a couple of these rifles when new, relatively speaking, out of the box. We first got them and cleaned them up. It was very, very hard to get the bolt open. It took a lot of effort. I'm a decock. So it'd be like, you know, your whole hand would have to crank it over. It'd be real difficult. And this one is now, I can do it with, you know, just pinky on it, no problem. By doing these things of polishing those camming ramps, this camming ramp and that camming ramp, it's both very slick now in both opening and closing. Now, if you're still unsatisfied with it, there is another thing you can do that will reduce the effort. As you probably already know, the Mosin has a very, well, hardly, almost non-existent safety. The safety on these is supposed to be pull back the cocking knob and rotate it to the side like that. 1/4 turn to the left, well, not quite a quarter turn, about 1/8 of a turn, and it holds it back against the body of the receiver so that you can't fire the weapon, because obviously the cocking piece is held back. The firing pin is attached to the cocking piece, and then you would have to release that back before you could fire it. So one of the things you can do is, if you find that effort super high, you can't pull it back far enough to turn that over to the side, you may have a situation where you have a firing pin spring effort which is too high. And one of the things you can do is you can take the bolt apart. I'm not going to show that yet. You can take the spring out, and you can cut about one coil to maybe 1.5 coils off the length of the spring, and that will reduce the spring load. You don't want to cut too much, because if you cut too much, you reduce the strike on the primer, and you could get light strikes, which would cause a no fire condition, and those can be a little bit dangerous if you happen to start opening the bolt and then the round fires off on you. So that'd be extremely rare occurrence, but I have heard of those kind of things happening before, where a light strike will delay the firing of the round by up to several seconds. So that's the caution in terms of cutting the spring. But cutting the spring will reduce the opening effort a little bit, because when you are opening this and those camming ramps are working against each other, the force that they're having to overcome is the firing pin spring. And so the less firing pin spring force there is, the less force there's going to be to open the bolt. So I would first recommend making sure that you polish up all these areas. Again, the camming ramp area here, the the ramp here on the front of the bolt that interfaces with this part of the receiver, that's for sticky opening. And then for a rough closing would be the area right behind the bolt handle here that interfaces with this part of the receiver. So hopefully that was helpful. And if you have a good operating bolt that's very smooth, you also want to grease, very important, once you clean this up and you remove the polishing compound, that you clean the bolt up well. That polishing compound will get that polishing compound will get everywhere. It will get inside the bolt body where the spring is. So it's very important that you disassemble the bolt. It's very easy to do. And you clean all that out, and then you put some grease inside there around the spring in these camming ramps. You can just put a little dab in these little other areas. These two areas are not that important. It's mostly this camming ramp area that's important. You can also put a tiny little dab here on the the spot where the sear engages the cocking knob tab, and that'll help a little bit with the slickness of the trigger. So those are the conditions for when you are having a sticky bolt situation, when you do not have a round chambered, and you're just dry cycling the bolt and you have a sticky bolt. Now, if this bolt is sticky when you're shooting the rifle, there are other possibilities. All of those same conditions apply that I just went over for dry cycling. All of those same problems can occur when you have a sticky bolt when you're shooting the rifle. And but if you only have a sticky bolt when shooting the rifle and it cycles very smoothly when you're dry cycling without firing a round, then there are some unique issues that may come out. This is a snap cap, so no concerns. It's not a real round. I'm just going to use this for demonstration purposes. So if when you're at the range and you're shooting your rifle and you're having a serious problem with the bolt closing on a round, even though it closes very nicely without a round, then there are a couple of specific areas you can take a look at. One is that the inside edge here of the bolt face could have too sharp of an edge, and it might be digging in as this round, the rim of the round maybe not perfectly aligned as it's trying to go in there. It may catch and kind of shave off a little bit of the edge of the cartridge because this inside edge is too sharp. So you can go in there and you kind of work that a little bit with maybe like some 220 grit sandpaper to just kind of knock down that sharp edge. So that's one thing. The other thing is same kind of deal, but with the extractor. These edges on the extractor, these edges on the side, this inside edge of the extractor, and even the point here on the extractor could be too sharp and could be digging into the rim and causing a problem. You could also have a damaged extractor where it's bent, so it's bent too far in that direction, so it takes too much effort to pop this extractor over the rim of the cartridge. That could be an issue. And you could also potentially have a tight headspace condition. That's extremely rare unless the rifle has been rebarreled with a new barrel. I've never heard of anybody having a Mosin Nagant with a tight headspace problem. So I do have a pair of Oki headspace gauges, a go and a no-go. And if the headspace is tight, it won't close on a go gauge. So again, this is just a snap cap. It's a dummy round. It's not for real. So if it has a problem chambering around, even though it cycles well dry, if it has trouble closing on a round, you can take a look at those edges on the bolt face. Edges could be too sharp. Extractor edges could be too sharp. You can kind of work them a little bit, knock down those sharp edges with a little 220 grit paper. There are other tutorials about how to deal with the extractor on a Mosin Nagant. I'm not going to get into that here, but just to let you know, there are some out there. You can search for them. Now, what if you're firing your rifle? Again, this is a snap cap. It's a dummy round. It's not for real. You're firing your rifle. You shoot it, and it closes fine, no problem, but it's sticky, real sticky. I'm just pretending it's sticky. It's real sticky to open, even though it cycles very well dry without a round. But you're at the range, and it's only sticky at the range when you're firing rounds. Well, one of the things I didn't get into is that the chamber itself inside here, I've assumed that you've done a good job cleaning that out. It may be that you haven't done a good job cleaning it out, and it's very, very still full of cosmoline that it, kind of leaches into the very fine pores of the surface of the metal. Well, as you start shooting rounds off, that cosmoline heats up. It starts to leach out, and it can get on the surface of the cartridge and start to make it sticky. So making sure that you clean out that chamber real well and you polish it up is very important. You can do that with something like a like a 20 gauge or maybe even a 410 chamber brush, or if you have a specific like 30 cal chamber brush, that would be preferred. I don't have one, so I've used this like 20 gauge chamber brush or shotgun brush, brass one, and I would wrap it in like old t-shirt or something, put a little polishing compound in there, and just run it for 20-30 seconds with a drill to clean out the chamber, and then go in there real good, clean it out real good with like mineral spirits or whatever other cleaner that you have to make sure you get all that polishing compound out of there. So that's one way you can, that's one of the causes too. The other possibility, although I think it's very remote, is that you have excessive headspace and the cartridge is swelling up too much and it's kind of getting locked into the chamber. So in that case, you would want a no-go headspace gauge to check that you don't have excessive headspace. That's another problem. The other area that I didn't discuss that you could work on lapping in, but I have found, just from my experience, isn't really necessary on the Mosin, is the locking lugs on the front of the bolt, the back side of these locking lugs here, as they lock into the lugs on the receiver. Those could be lapped in, both the top one here and the bottom one here. I've never found that to be an issue on any of my rifles. That would be kind of the last thing that I would take a look at as a possibility as to why it might be sticky both on closing and opening. But I've not found that to be a problem. So I did add that to the diagnostic flowchart, but I don't think that'll be an issue. I hope this tutorial was helpful. In the video, I'm going to put the diagnostic flowchart up at the very end of this video. I'm going to leave it on screen for about 30 seconds. You can just pause it if you want to read through it and see what it has to say. Maybe do a screen capture, print it off for yourself. Anybody's free to use it for their own non-commercial use to work on their own rifles. So I hope you enjoyed it, and take care.